Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another case. Today we're going to talk about Kassie Dewey from Spokane, Washington. On April 11th, 2021, 35-year-old Kassie Dewey and her daughter were viciously attacked by Kassie's ex-boyfriend in the garage of their home. By the time first responders arrived on the scene, Kassie had already passed away, and they found her daughter barely hanging on. The first responders rushed her to the hospital, where she spent a month in ICU recovering from her injuries. This is their story. Kassie was born and raised in Spokane, Washington. She had 4 siblings, 3 sisters, and 1 brother. Growing up, Kassie played soccer, baseball, basketball, and volleyball. And her uncle says that she was a rock star at tetherball. I don't know if you guys know about tetherball, but that is a flashback to my youth. When Kassie was 6 years old, one of her favorite things to do was just belt out Mariah Carey. And this is a memory that still sticks with her family to this day. She graduated from North Central High School in 2004. She really enjoyed jamming out to good music. She had 3 beautiful children who are incredibly strong people. And I think that's a testament to Kassie herself. She was a strong woman, and she clearly passed that on to her babies. Kassie was absolutely gorgeous. She had green eyes and red hair. But as you can see in her pictures, she often changed the style and the color. Her sense of fashion was bold and loud. She loved the color purple and had a zest for life that was enviable and almost palpable to the people around her. Those who loved and continue to love her say that she knew them almost better than they knew themselves. It's obvious that Kassie was a bright light in all the lives that she touched. And she was deeply loved and cherished by all those around her. Kassie worked as a mental health technician at Eastern State Hospital. Eastern State is one of Washington's 2 state-run facilities that care for vulnerable adults who are suffering from long-term or serious mental illness. Kassie worked there for almost 2 decades, which is longer than I've ever held a job. And everybody says that she was a really great employee. And sometime in 2019 or 2020, one of her coworkers actually caught her eye. He was a nurse and he worked in a different part of the hospital from her. It's reported that he worked well with patients and that he was very skilled at diffusing conflicts and working with even the most volatile patients that they had. It would later come out that some of his coworkers gave him shout outs for his positive energy and for his ability to maintain a safe environment for the staff and the patients. And although quiet, this man was making quite a stir at the hospital. You see, in 2015, his wife, who had previously filed a protection order against him, finally had enough with the relationship. She filed for a divorce and left for good. That same year, he hooked up with a psychiatric security attendant at the hospital, and they started dating. And it seems like the relationship lasted 4 or 5 years, although it seemed pretty toxic. She would later report that he was manipulative and abusive to her. In 2019, when she decided to break off the relationship, he went absolutely crazy and actually strangled her. And the only reason he let go was because she bit him and then started screaming for her son, who called 911. He was arrested for second-degree assault, and there was a restraining order placed against him. And despite the hospital administrators being aware of the situation, they grossly mishandled it. They actually didn't even follow their own policies when dealing with the situation. Rather than putting him on leave while his felony charges were pending, they gave him an alternative assignment, which actually put him in charge of the woman that he attacked. After Kassie's death, this whole situation was brought back to light, and an investigation was held, which later proved that the hospital did in fact mishandle the situation, and this led to the CEO of the hospital resigning from his position. And the staff was actually split. There was a clear divide on people who believed that he was guilty and those who didn't. Between the hospital dismissing her concerns and her coworkers who thought she was a liar, it didn't take long before this woman actually quit her job and moved out of town in fear for her safety. And it was around this time in 2019 that Kassie and this gentleman started dating. He's not a gentleman. I shouldn't have said that. As you can guess, Kassie was under the impression that he was innocent. And she would later tell her family that she didn't think he was as bad as everybody was saying he was. And despite all of the warnings, the two moved in together in June of 2020. It seems like this relationship was also toxic and deteriorated pretty quickly. Kassie's kids would go on to tell police and first responders that the two fought constantly. And Kassie told her family that he was just a really jealous person. I'm not completely sure about his mental health, but I do know that he suffered from depression and drank to self-medicate. And when the two drank together, they would end up in screaming matches by the end of the night. Not even a year later, on April 9th, 2021, Kassie had had enough of the relationship and she decided to break it off and told her ex that he was no longer welcome in her home. He was furious and she had to change the locks to make sure that he didn't get into the house. The following day, on Saturday, Kassie received over 100 text messages from this man, who later police officers would report were very disturbing. On Sunday, April 11th, he parked his car 1 block away from Kassie's house and snuck into her detached garage, where he waited to attack her. I'm not sure if this was a regular routine for her or if he just knew that she was going to be going to her car that day. But sometime during the day, Kassie's 2 older children, who were age 11 and 14, were at their father's. Kassie was getting ready to go pick them up from his house. Kassie gathered her belongings, told her 5-year-old to grab her bag of jelly beans and come on to the car with her so they could go get the kids. They made it into the garage, but were violently ambushed by her ex. He stabbed Kassie 26 times before turning his attention on her daughter. He attacked the daughter so viciously that she had 7 stab wounds to her torso area that penetrated her lungs, her liver, and she had her throat cut. Her father would later report that she also had defensive wounds, indicating that she tried to fight off her attacker. When Kassie never arrived to pick up her children, their father drove them to her house. I'm not sure why, and I'm not trying to judge. He just dropped them off and left. And the children couldn't get into the house. All the doors were locked, so they grabbed a ladder and climbed in through the window. When they finally got inside, the house was a complete mess and they got a super weird feeling but continued to look around. And as they were looking around, they heard a car running in the garage. So they tried to open up the door and get in, but they couldn't. And that's when they knew something was really, really wrong, so they called 911. When the first responders arrived, they were able to make entry into the garage, where they found 2 vehicles running, blood everywhere, and Kassie, her daughter, and Kassie's ex-boyfriend all laying on the ground in close proximity to each other. It was obvious to them that Kassie had passed away from her injuries. Her ex was semi-conscious but had no serious injuries, and Kassie's daughter was alive but barely hanging on. And they quickly rushed her to the hospital. Kassie's ex was all acting confused, and first responders actually thought he was under the influence, but then later they were like, maybe he's intoxicated from all these car fumes. But they brought him to the hospital, and when he was released, they arrested him. He was charged with murder and attempted murder. Kassie's daughter spent around a month in intensive care. Not only did her little body need to heal from all of her wounds, but she got an infection caused by her stab wound in her throat. I guess it was draining into her chest and lungs, and she got a really bad fever, and she had to go on antibiotics. She had multiple surgeries, and at one point was put into a medical-induced coma. Her recovery in the hospital was long and extremely painful for her. For those interested, there is a GoFundMe set up for her medical expenses, and I'll link that information below. And Kassie's family is just amazing. They actually held an appreciation event for the first responders who came to the scene that day to thank them for all that they did. Sometime in February of this year, 2023, Kassie's ex-boyfriend pled guilty to premeditated murder and premeditated attempted murder. And he was sentenced to... Are you ready? He was sentenced to 36 years for his violent attack on both Kassie and her daughter. The judge said that because of his age, he was 43 at the time of his sentencing, that this was basically a life sentence. Basically a life sentence and a life sentence aren't the same thing. I mean, the situation literally makes me sick to my stomach. Imagine how Kassie's daughter's gonna feel when he's released. I don't care if he's 80, 90, 100 years old. Imagine how she's gonna feel. Kassie's ex, who I refuse to even name, I think he received that sentence because he had no felonies, no criminal convictions in the state of Washington, And he was a registered nurse, so he was passing all those background checks and everything. And by the time that Kassie met him, both of the protection and restraining orders that were filed against him had been resolved by that time. Every single day, Kassie's family members and her children miss her dearly. She'll be remembered for her laugh, her beautiful smile, her strength, her bold nature, her lively spirit, and for the deep love that she had for her children. In court, her son actually said, "My mother was one of the best moms you can get. You have broken my heart into a million pieces that will never come back." Kassie's story continues to impact the community of Spokane, and it sheds a light on domestic violence and highlights that one of the most dangerous times in a domestic violence relationship is when a victim tries to leave. Her story is also building momentum behind a proposition called Tina's Law that proposes a national domestic violence registry, something that some of you guys have actually mentioned on some of my other videos. It's similar to an S-offender registry, except it would be for domestic violence.
Tina is his niece. Her murder led him to work with lawmakers to create House Bill 1678, the statewide registry that would list people convicted of domestic violence. Representative Brad Clippert is one of the sponsors of the bill.
I've spent 4 years of my life pushing for this, and I'm hoping this year we have success. Made a promise to Tina that I was going to do something about these domestic violence laws.
In 2019 and 2020, the bill didn't move through. Estes cites current state code that allows anyone to access certain records and increase of DV cases as reason to pass this bill.
If we already have the laws on the books, why not put them on a registry where people can look themselves?
Estes is hopeful for 2022 being the year Tina's Law is passed.
Thank you so much for listening to Kassie's story. If you find it in your heart, please light a candle for Kassie or for anybody that's experiencing domestic violence or has lost their lives at the hands of domestic violence. And if you or anybody that you know or love is experiencing this, please reach out to anybody in your support system or local resources. You are not alone, and there's a lot of people out there who want to help you. Stay safe out there, and I will see you guys in the next video.